word. Does it tell you or no? Okay. It's recording now. Okay, so in honor of World Philosophy Day, Jay, I got an argument for you.
All right.
So
I'm
premise
ready.
one is that if there is any knowledge possible, if you know anything, your cognitive faculties must be reliable. It must be permissible to trust your cognitive faculties. That's premise one.
Okay, so if I have knowledge at all, I must have reliable cognitive faculties. So the other side of that would be, if I don't have reliable cognitive faculties, I can't have knowledge.
Correct. It's essentially, if you can't presumptively trust your cognitive equipment, then it is impossible for you to know anything.
So
Because,
that
for
has to be
example,
a premise, because if it wasn't a premise, it would be self-defeating, right? Because then
Right.
how would I know that that statement is true or false if I don't have cognitive faculties?
right, and kind of more fundamentally, if you think about it, even if you say to yourself, I have to first prove my cognitive faculties are reliable before I could rely on them, you could not do that without relying on your cognitive faculties. That's all you have. You are your cognitive faculty. You can't get outside of your cognitive faculties and prove that your cognitive faculties are reliable to you, and then justify yourself in relying on them going forward. So the kind of first premise, if you think it's possible, so much as possible to know anything, you've got to presume, and it's got to be okay to presume, that your cognitive faculties are reliable. So that's kind of premise one. I mean, there's a lot of like examples one could give, like with perception, right? If you were to say, look, I don't trust perception, well, you have no other way of getting at the external world. And so if you don't treat the deliverances of your cognitive faculties as presumptively reliable, then you'll never be able to establish any knowledge. So it's kind of, now, reliable doesn't mean infallible. And all you really need for this argument to work is that you treat the deliverances as presumptively, as prima facie. So it's possible that you can be wrong and you can correct yourself, but in order to even take one deliverance of your cognitive faculty and use it to kind of correct another, there has to be kind of a general attitude that, generally speaking, your cognitive equipment is reliable enough that you can treat the way things seem to you as a guide to the way things are.
So there's a big gap there's between nihilism and credulity, right? So here you're saying,
yes,
I can't be nihilistic, and I don't necessarily. I could also be, gullible,
yeah.
But that's all fine. I mean,
yes. I mean, I have no argument against the nihilist, right? But my only argument is that if you are not a nihilist, if you think that you know some things, you cannot reject this principle of credulity, this principle that says that you presume your cognitive equipment to be reliable. You can come up with a couple other examples, but I mean, I think the key insight is that there's really three things you can do, right? You can say your cognitive equipment is unreliable. Well, then obviously you can't know anything. You can take the middle view, which is to say that it's guilty until proven innocent, right? Your cognitive equipment, to be rational, you should treat it as unreliable until you establish that it's reliable. That's kind of the middle view. And then the permissive view say, no, the opposite. You treat your cognitive equipment as, you presume it innocent until you have a reason to doubt it. And I think it's obvious to everyone, right, that if you think your cognitive equipment explicitly is unreliable, you can't know anything.
Yeah, so even the middle view is impossible, right? There's no way to prove it because you have nothing to bootstrap from.
Exactly, and I think what's less intuitive but equally true is that the middle view also fails.
Yes.
So if you know anything, then your only option is to presume, generally speaking, that the way things are is a guide to the way things.
Okay.
Sorry, the way.
All right.
Okay. Premise one.
Accept it. I take it.
Take it. Premise two. There's two let's define two worldviews, theism and atheism. And let's define atheism as the doctrine, the proposition that ultimate reality is neutral. It doesn't have values, it doesn't have preferences. It's sort of kind of contingent, it's arbitrary. It's not a will, it's not a mind. Ultimate reality is just the brute facts of the universe.
Does that exclude things like, I believe that there may be some powers that are not material, but are not creators of the ultimate reality, or is it just materialism in disguise, or is it something that allows other things?
I guess what I'm trying to do is be more precise than just say materialism, because I think you could actually be a materialist but think that there's a bias at ultimate reality that's truth aimed. And so, you know what, let's just start with like common sense definition of atheism and common sense definition of theism. And put to the side sort of questions about how there might be exceptions to the rule. Generally speaking, premise 2 is that the reliability of your cognitive equipment is far more probable conditioning on theism than on atheism. And so, therefore, atheism would give you a reason to doubt that you could know anything. So it would be a defeater for the possibility of knowledge.
Okay, so let me unpack that. See, I understand. All right. So if I am a theist, and let's just say, just to make it so that it's really simple, I'll just take a particular kind of theist, a Christian theist that believes that there's one God who created the universe. He's good, powerful, omniscient, omnipotent. Okay, and he made me. So because I'm a theist, I believe that he's a reasoned God, a God that again, this is a Christian story. He made me for a reason, I believe, again, because I'm a Christian, so I'm allowed to believe that. Okay, so then yeah, premise 1 just kicks in straight up. I have a reason to believe that that my faculties are credible, and so yeah, so okay, that then there's no problem there.
Yeah, so because what happens is, as a theist, you can ascribe, now obviously theism comes in multiple varieties, but you have the conceptual resources to ascribe to ultimate reality a posture towards you that would want you to have true beliefs. Whereas if you're an atheist, presumably, you have no real reason for thinking that ultimate reality would prefer you to have true beliefs rather than false.
So okay, so like, what about like the Norse god Loki, who's a trickster, right? I'm a Norse god believing guy, maybe, and he doesn't want me to believe in reality. He wants me to believe in something else, something false.
Right. If that were your religion, that would give you an even stronger defeater. Right. If your view of ultimate reality is that it wants you to have false beliefs, right? Then yes, that would undermine your cognitive equipment. And I see what you're saying is one would have to be precise about one's conception of theism.
Yeah. So it has to be precisely exactly what you said earlier, which is has to be a god or power or whatever that seeks truth in you.
Yes, in classical theism, or we say Christianity, classical theism thinks of ultimate reality as wanting you to have true beliefs.
Okay.
At least to some extent, and so
right.
More precisely, right? Christian doctrine is that we were created in the image and likeness of God. The God is mind, infinite, perfect intelligence. The world is intelligible to us because there's a fit between our mind and the intelligibility of the world that is itself the product of the infinite mind's ordering of his creation. On that view, it makes sense to trust your cognitive faculties.
Right, because
right?
that God that made the universe wants what's good, true, and beautiful for me also. And
Yeah.
therefore, right. So that seems like it's really, it's not exactly theism, but it's like classical theism. I think.
Yes, I think you have to have a thicker conception of theism than the bare minimum of kind of thinking of ultimate reality as like eternal. I think if you have a personal or an intelligent mind at ultimate reality, and you think of that ultimate reality as having this posture towards you, then conditioning on that, belief in the reliability of your cognitive equipment follows in a way that it just can't.
Okay, so yeah, so let's explore the atheism.
Yes.
Okay, so what we have is a denial of classical theism, let's just say, because I think it's broader than just atheism, if I understand you. And so if that's true, the universe is not ordered to make me seek for any reason that I should know or want to know the truth or seek the truth. Right? Is that the key thing?
Yeah, I mean, another way to think about it is to say, if you believe that reality is deterministic, which most materialist atheists do, you believe that at any given time, there was a prior state of the universe that caused the current state of the universe in a deterministic.
I don't even think you need determinism here, Newman. I think if there's reality is just a random sequence of events.
Right. That's true. That's right. I don't know that randomism solves the problem either. So on either view, if reality is ultimately neutral, or if you don't have a reason to believe that reality is ultimately oriented towards you so that your equipment is reliable. Now, one response is, well, we know on the atheist view, let's say that there's been evolution, and we can believe in that evolution selects for survival.
Yes.
So you could kind of have an argument that having true beliefs is selected for. And what's sort of interesting, though, is that it's unclear that you can really identify survival.
Well, isn't that, I mean, that strikes me as bringing God in from the other side, right? There you have a selective advantage for knowing true things. Well, why would that be in a universe that just is, with no guiding force? Like you have to, like, the kind of evolutionary argument generally has this environment, and you're evolving within the context of that environment, and there's selection for fitness within that environment. Well, and then where did that environment come from? Why would it have it built into a true beliefs as its sort of core driving force?
But I guess if you were to stipulate that reality is ultimately governed by the processes that evolution describes, then what I'm saying is perhaps conditioning on that, you could make an argument that it's probable that your faculties would be reliable, because reliable faculties are conducive to survival. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, of course, that only gets you so far, because first you have to get to life to begin with, right? Right.
No, totally agree. There'd be other reasons, right? Other problems, but just from the point of view of like epistemological argument for the existence of God, I think the hardest or the biggest challenge that the argument faces is whether having reliable cognitive faculties, is it more probable conditioning on theism than, say, selection, survive? And I think that's the real finding is that I don't know that there's a knockdown argument. I mean, I think Planting is convinced that survival is one thing, truth conductivity is another, and that actually they diverge. Yeah. And that what we are doing in reflecting is actually counterproductive to just rank survival, right? He thinks it's counterproductive, except for maybe the random philosopher who can't mate, except for being good at this stuff. For the vast majority of us, it's actually getting in the
I
way.
mean, philosophy leads, Socrates to take the hemlock. How is that survival?
Right. But then I
Okay.
guess the flip side would be is if you can model reality, you can kind of control it and conquer it. So like engineering, feats of engineering. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
think that's where the argument I kind of get tripped up on.
Okay, so now
Yeah.
let's explore that a little more. So
Yeah.
in fact, so like we're trying to compare these two. You're saying one is more likely than the other.
Yes.
Okay, so in what sense is it more likely? So it's more likely if conditional on, so like it's certain actually if I believe in the classical.
That's true.
God, there's no uncertainty at all.
See, that's a good point. That's a good point. That there's actually, even if it's still possible on atheism, it's uncertain because it all kind of depends on your view of what the processes are that gave rise to your cognitive equipment on your worldview. Whereas on ours, it's at least, I mean, it's certain, right?
Yeah.
There's no uncertainty. So that there's actually, the synergy is stronger. Now,
now an atheist could say, okay, there's
Yeah.
an atheist that believes in something like the anthropic principle, right?
Yeah.
So the world is organized this way because how else could it be? We wouldn't know about it if it weren't just happened to organize this way by random chance or whatever.
Right. Now, the anthropic principle, I don't know that it solves the epistemological argument for God. I think it addresses whether the features of the universe that theists point to say that the universe is very improbable.
No. I just want to apply to your argument. So
Okay.
you have this anthropic principle. I'm an atheist, believes in the anthropic principle. That's why I'm here at all. All right, because if the universe were not structured the way it is, I would not be here.
Oh, right. So the same, but how would that work with respect to epistemology? In other words,
I think it actually helps your argument, right? Because if that's true, there's no truth principle in it other than the fact that it creates my existence. A being that can think about the universe,
Right.
fine, but there's no reason for me to think that the universe has been structured so that I am ordered toward truth. That doesn't get to the anthropic principle. In fact, that begs the question, right? So the question is,
right.
am I ordered?
I mean, I think what it gets is that we exist.
Yes.
And so, obviously we, I don't know that it gets you knowledge, right?
Doesn't get you knowledge.
Right. I think the way the anthropic principle would work applied here would be as if you assumed that we have knowledge and you assumed that theism was false. You could say, well, then
that's arguing against the premises,
right?
Right.
So, I think you're begging too many questions. I mean, you're always going to beg some questions in any debate, but I think that move begs too many questions. And
so
then
I think this is reasonable. So like, because I mean, and it's just built on classical theism is absolutely dead certain that my critical faculties are bent toward knowledge.
Yes. And I think what I'm kind of getting at is like, most of us have very strong epistemic conviction that we know some things. And I think what's interesting is if you believe that strongly, that itself may be a reason to affirm theism.
Right.
Because on theism, that's far more likely to be true than other and particular kind of theism.
Okay, wait. Let's slow down here, buddy. Did you pull something over on me? All right. So I've accepted your premise one and I've accepted your premise two. Classical theism is more likely to result in a being like me that is bent toward truth, that with critical faculty that bent toward truth that I can believe, that I can trust and believe in, even if it doesn't lead to certain knowledge. Whereas atheism, as we've defined it, it may produce that knowledge, but it doesn't have to.
Right.
Okay. Right. But what if I'm the kind of atheist that believes that it does? It just happens to.
So I think the point is that you have no basis for that. Whereas as a theist, you have a basis for that. There's your world, I mean, both views are ultimately circular at some meta level. But the difference is that there's a virtuous circularity in that your belief that God exists and God has this orientation towards us then reinforces the foundation for believing that your cognitive equipment is reliable, which in turn reinforces your belief in God. Whereas if you're an atheist, you're I mean, I suppose you could be an atheist and think ultimate reality is ordered towards bringing about reliable cognitive faculties.
Yeah. So I mean, let me try to make the distinction and see if what I would say characterizes what you're trying to get at. If classical liberalism inherently, just by its nature of what it is, brings into being creatures like us that are ordered toward truth, that are ordered toward with rational faculties that might be able to find truth. Whereas atheism only incidentally might create that, right? So
Right.
did I capture that right? So it just happens to have happened, but it didn't have to.
Right. And actually, I think that the missing premise that I forgot to mention is that, yes, that accidental aspect of the atheistic worldview is precisely what trips it up, because part of what it means to know is to have a non-accidentality, is to be able to have the reliability, the confidence in your equipment. So it's possible on theism, but it seems accidental. It doesn't seem reliable in the way that it needs to be to satisfy the criteria of knowledge that we tend to have intuitively. So, but I think what you could do to get around this as an atheist is just stipulate that ultimate reality is such that it has the property of wanting you to have true beliefs. Now, in that case, your conception of ultimate reality is starting to resemble the theist's conception of reality. And in fact, if you start ascribing the ultimate reality necessity, that it couldn't have been otherwise, it wasn't contingently this way,
then you already brought God in, actually.
Right, at that point, like if ultimate reality is oriented towards you having true beliefs, and it necessarily had to be that way, you're starting to get close to theism.
Yeah, it's right, exactly. Like you just adopted. I mean, in fact, I would say this is like the cases where what you describe as atheism has certainty, in any certainty at all, on this issue about my critical faculties leading toward the truth. It's like a hair's breadth away from classical theism.
Yes. Well, and ultimately, I think that's the argument, is that the more that you characterize ultimate reality to justify the reliability of cognitive equipment, the further you get from the kind of pre-theoretical atheism, and the closer you get to theism. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Because I think on atheism, understood as kind of ultimate reality is contingent. It didn't have to be the way it is. And ultimate reality is just the laws of nature that we observe. And if that's your concept, if you're a physicalist, a materialist, and you think that the deliverance of science are all that we can say about ultimate reality, there's really nothing within that intellectual resources that supports ascribing the ultimate reality a preference towards you having true beliefs. I don't think. And this is where the only move that you could make is that you could say, well, ultimate reality is oriented towards survival of the fittest, and fitness correlates with truth conducivity. But I think I don't know.
Like as we talked about that, even there, the environment in which the evolution takes place has to be such that it's oriented toward the truth for some reason, right? I mean, you can't give a telos if all you have is a random world, a random materiality.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, I think you could be just speaking kind of inexactly, where you're not positing a telos in the strict sense, but you're just saying that the processes, the laws of nature are such that there is survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And
This
fit correlate.
say, like,
Think about that.
I mean, I think this is one of these things where like it would help to have an actual atheist in this conversation, because maybe we're doing an injustice.
No, I think you're right. That's what we got to do next.
Yeah, but I think this is interesting. I mean, I think I buy this. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to set aside my biases here, although it's very difficult.
Right. Well, that's right. That's what's hard. But I do think that epistemologically, we make a bunch of naive assumptions, both theists and atheists, and those naive assumptions are far more probable on theism than atheism, and they may not even be possible, honestly, on a real strong atheist view, where ultimate reality is physical and contingent, and it's nothing more than the laws of nature that we observe. I don't know that at that point you have enough confidence in your epistemic equipment to be able to feel like the way that things seem to you is sufficiently a reliable guide to the way that things are, that you can go around believing you know stuff. I don't think you can.
Yeah. I mean, you're even in a worse position than Hume, right? I mean, how do you learn anything about causality if that's true?
Right. Although in a way, I think what Hume is doing is essentially this argument, because I think what Hume is pointing out is that if you're, well, it's not this argument, it's a different argument, but I think what he's saying is if you're purely an empiricist, there's so many things you think you can know that you really can't, because you can't know cause and effect, because really you're sneaking in a principle of simplicity, right? There are things you presuppose that transcend empirical observation that the empiricist takes for granted, but doesn't have the honesty to acknowledge that he's taking for granted and then defend. I think that's what but it's a similar thing. Is what we're saying is there's an even more fundamental principle, which is that your cognitive equipment is reliable writ large, that the atheist is presupposing, just as Hume was pointing out, that in order to say believe in induction, you're assuming that the laws of the world would be uniform over time. You're assuming things that you can't empirically prove.
Right.
And I think what we're saying is similarly, you're assuming your cognitive equipment.
Yeah, I mean, it's even worse. You won't even have the capacity to prove one way or the other. Right. I mean, that's even, I mean, it's a weaker statement than Hume in that sense, but therefore more sure.
No, that's right. That's right. But I mean, I think it's actually structurally similar kind of argument to what Hume is doing, though obviously what Hume illustrates is that this kind of reasoning, right? You don't have to go one way or the other. You can just be a skeptic, right? You can be a nihilist. You don't, if our argument works, it doesn't prove God exists.
No, it says there's two choices. You can either be a nihilist about your own cognitive faculties, or you can be a theist and accept them.
Yeah, exactly. So like you can believe that there are empirically unverifiable principles that justify induction, or you can just believe you can't have induction based on Hume's argument. But Hume's argument doesn't forward. It's a similar kind of dynamic, I think.
Yeah, and so what you're left with is the force of this argument is it excludes the middle, right? You can't both be someone who believes in actually it doesn't quite exclude the middle. What it does is it says the middle is very unlikely. You can't.
Or it shows that the middle is no different, really, than nihilism. Yes. The middle thinks it's different, but it really isn't, because ultimately you've got to trust your cognitive equipment.
Right.
And the only way to really, or the seemingly the most coherent way to trust your cognitive equipment is to believe that ultimate reality is oriented towards you having reliable. And again, this isn't necessarily an argument. I think it's an observation that theism as a framework has a particular virtue epistemically, which is that it's
I don't have to worry, right? I don't have to worry about this, how much I trust faculty.
I mean, nobody ultimately believes in God because of this, but it's an observation that theism has as a virtue, as a hypothesis.
Right. It solves a problem of mine that I would have to, I would have to when I was little, I worried, are the things I'm getting in, are they real? Like, how do I know?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the only real response that I've ever kind of come across is this idea that, well, how do you know that your cognitive equipment isn't reliable on atheism? And again, I think that misses the point. I'm not saying that our cognitive equipment is necessarily unreliable on atheism. But what I'm saying is you have a reason to be agnostic about your cognitive equipment on atheism. And then premise one is designed to show that agnosticism about your cognitive equipment is tantamount to denial, to nihilism. Those are the two real premises. Is that on atheism, you need to be agnostic, uncertain. And that's enough to strip you of any basis for having the possibility of knowledge, because knowledge requires you not to put your cognitive equipment agnostically on trial and see if it can be vindicated, but it requires you to start ab initio with an orientation towards your cognitive equipment that it is reliable.
Right. Let me put it in practical terms. Maybe it's a little crude, but that what you're saying, if I'm right, if I'm hearing it right, is this sort of atheism. When you're making arguments, you always have to then have this very radical skepticism. I'm going to have to ask all the time, well, can I really trust my senses? Can I truly trust even how I think? Can I trust my cognitive faculties at all for every argument?
Yes.
And you'll never be able to answer yes.
Correct. And then when you try to go, you can't get out of the morass, because if you try to prove your cognitive equipment is reliable, like I said, but hold on, you're using your cognitive equipment. That's what we're putting that on trial. You can't use what's on trial. If you could use what was on trial to prove its reliability, well, we wouldn't be putting it on trial in the first place. It would mean that we already had established it was reliable.
Right.
And so
at the same time, it doesn't tell the theist that he's always right, because sometimes I made mistakes that the theist accepts that. Sometimes my cognitive equipment leads me astray.
Yeah, like we often will think that we see something and it's not there. We miscalculate. Just because we miscalculate sometimes doesn't mean that we conclude that, our powers of reasoning are completely unreliable. But the point is that we presume that they're reliable until we have some reason to think they're unreliable. And that's the posture that you need to have any knowledge.
Right.
I think that part is straightforward. I think the hard part is defining theism and defining atheism and really excluding the possibility that an atheist could simply characterize ultimate reality in a way that provides the same kind of coherence and mutual reinforcement that we can provide as theists. I think atheism can't do that without de facto becoming a kind of theism light. Because I think that the way to formalize that argument is just to say knowledge is ultimately about true belief and non-accidentality.
Right.
And so I think the difficulty with being an atheist is that even if you think you have true beliefs, it's unclear why you're not thinking in terms of why it's not accidental that you have true, like what,
Right.
why is it necessary and not accidental? on
Correct.
atheism? And so it's possible that you might have true belief. I don't know that you have knowledge or that confidence. And
No,
again,
there's always going to be that doubt. That's what you're
Yeah.
saying.
yeah, I think it's, it's something I think Darwin even worried about, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you put it is actually quite attractive. This is not a proof of God's existence, right? It's just an observation about certainty about the most basic things.
Yeah.
If you're an atheist versus if you're not.
Yep. Very good. Thanks, Jay. That was
That was
fun.
really fun. That was
Yeah,
really
okay.
fun, man.
Hold on, let me stop. Let's stop.
Dude, we
Dude,
could
I
do
think
this.